Doing a segue at the bottom of page 131 of
Okay.
the chapter Evolution and Involution of Consciousness. Nevertheless, three fundamental types of Phanabhaka include all the individualized experiences of Phanabhaka. The first of the three fundamental types is the rudimentary. This type is the Phanabhaka of the phenomenal false life in illusion, experienced by all who, daily passing away in Phana, gain Bhaka to abide in illusion every day. This rudimentary Phanabhaka of the ordinary phenomenal false life is composed of the ordinary sound sleep state and the ordinary awake state. As stated before, even when one with all of the impressions of illusion passes away in sound sleep, the same original divine absolute vacuum of the God is state is established, where never anything existed and where nothing ever exists except the one infinite and only reality as the everything, which is called the infinitude of God in his God is state. When the impressions of illusion with which one goes to sleep wake one up, one abides in illusion itself in the awake state and establishes everyday life in illusion. Accordingly, in everyday life, when one goes into sound sleep, Phana is established as one daily passes away in the original God state without consciousness. And when one wakes up daily, Bhaka is gained to abide in the everyday life of illusion, as long as sound sleep does not overpower and drag one once again into the state of the daily Phana, which is the one's original divine state of absolute vacuum. The second type of Phanabhaka is of the plains on the path towards attainment of the goal and differs from the rudimentary type of the ordinary phenomenal false life in illusion. Although this second type of Phanabhaka of the plains is also illusion. In every plane, from the first through the sixth plane on the path, the full consciousness evolved is being gradually withdrawn inwards or involved. Hence, the Phanabhaka of the planes is in accordance with the impressions impregnating the involving consciousness and differs from the first type of rudimentary Phanabhaka of the impressioned consciousness that is fully evolved or is still in the process of evolution. Every plane on the path towards the goal of Phana has its Phanabhaka, while the fully evolved consciousness is being gradually involved in conjunction with progressive advancement in the planes. But the generalized meaning of the Sufi term fana is the passing away in the absolute vacuum of the original God is state. Therefore, whether the fana is of the rudimentary type of the ordinary, phenomenal, false life, or of the second type of the planes on the path, it does not make any difference at all. In both types, the fana, or passing away in, is fundamentally the same. For daily in the sound sleep state, the impressioned consciousness in both cases passes away in the same state of absolute vacuum, regardless of all the differences in the types of impressions of illusion. Although the fana is always the same in both evolving consciousness and the involving consciousness, yet it is the type of impressions of illusion with which the consciousness is impregnated while abiding in illusion during the awake state that really matters, and that does create the differentiation when passing away in the sound sleep state or in the state of fana. For example, the fana of an animal or a creature in the sound sleep state passing away in the absolute vacuum with its own particular impressions of illusion differs completely from the fana of a human being in the sound sleep state passing away in the absolute vacuum with his own particular impressions of illusion. Similarly, the impressions of illusion of an ordinary human being will be quite different from the impressions of illusion of a human being in the planes of the path. Marian, could you please read?
Yes. Yes, thank you. In all cases, though the different types of fana remain always as, yet the different impressions impregnating individual consciousness in the baka of the awake state give rise to the individualized fana of each and all species and states of life in creation. In contrast with that, when the baka of the individualized life is gained in the awake state, after the sound sleep state of fana, the baka, which in Sufi terms means abiding in, establishes in illusion the everyday individualized life of illusion, in accordance with the predominant impressions with which the individualized life had passed away from the variety of impressions of illusion in the state of its individualized fana in the sound sleep state. As such, every individualized baka completely differs from every other bhaka, because when this individualized bhaka is gained in the awake state, the impressions of the impressioned consciousness of every individualized life are solely responsible for establishing in illusion the individualized life of illusion. Hence it is that in regular, unfailing succession, the phenomena of illusion in the sound sleep state is invariably followed by the bhaka of illusion in the awake state, which in turn gets lost in the inevitable phenomena, only to alternate and reestablish again and again, day after day, year after year, and life after life, irrespective of whether this phenomena or bhaka is of the ordinary phenomenal false life or is of the planes on the path. It is never stable as long as the illusion. As long as individualized life does not really and finally pass away in the phenomena of reality and become established in the abiding bhaka of divinity, it is obvious that there are bound to be innumerable and diverse types and groups of phenomena of illusion in accordance with the persisting impressions that consistently impress the evolving and the involving consciousness of individualized life in bhaka. In every plane also, from the first through the sixth plane of involving consciousness, there is bound to be a particular type of bhaka for each of the six planes, in accordance with the particular impressions of the illusion of each plane. When a man is said to be on the first plane, his fully evolved consciousness is beginning to involve, and his full consciousness remains focused on the first plane of the subtle sphere, because the impressions of the first plane, consistently impregnating his involving consciousness, make him abide in the first plane and lead him to experience the illusion of this plane. Even though the gross body of the man on the first plane is exactly like the gross body of a man not on the first plane, and though the man on the first plane also sleeps and wakes up exactly like an ordinary man of the everyday phenomenal false life, yet because his involving consciousness is directly focused on the first plane, he passes away in the sound sleep state of the first plane phenomena with the impressions of the illusion of the first plane, and wakes up daily to get established in the first plane bhaka, to abide in the first plane and to experience the impressions of that plane. The difference between the phenomena of the man who enters the planes of the path and of the man who is not on the planes of the path is that the former can be likened to a man who, after living for many years in a certain place, severs all of his past connections and sets out on a world tour, traveling from one place to another, crossing continents one after the other. Although this man would be daily going to sleep and awakening the next day, as he was accustomed to sleeping and awakening every day in his first habitat. Yet now, in the course of his world tour, he would be passing away in sound sleep and would be daily waking up, evidently with the predominant impressions of his completely changed environments and novel experiences. In short, he who enters the first plane of involving consciousness eventually experiences the first plane fully. This man who is getting established in the first plane establishes his living in this world of his own, and therefore he sleeps in this plane and wakes up every day in this plane as well. In exactly the same way, all individualized consciousness in all other planes passes away in the fauna of those particular planes to wake up in such planes and establish the everyday life baka in these particular planes.
Thanks, Marian. Ernie.
Nevertheless, the fauna baka of every plane of the path is fundamentally of the same type because it pertains only to consciousness that is evolving gradually and not to that of the evolving nor of the evolved consciousness. Whatever difference there is to differentiate the fauna baka of one plane from another plane would only be such as would exist between two men living on two different continents of the same earth and having their own individual impressions of that particular part of the earth on which each lives. The man in America has his own impressions and relative experiences of his individualized life. The same is true of the man in Asia, who has his own impressions and experiences related to his continent, which is quite different from America. But the fundamental fact remains that both men live on the same earth. Despite the vast difference between the impressions and the consequent experiences of these two men, yet when both sleep, they both pass away in sound sleep. And whether one sleeps on a bed of velvet and the other on a bed of hay, it is quite immaterial when both can equally enjoy the same sound sleep state. In like manner, when both wake up, they both can live their individual lives in illusion on the same earth, irrespective of the difference in their impressions and their consequent relative experiences due to living on different continents. Thus, the fauna bakas of all the planes on the path are not in any way different fundamentally, although each and every plane on the path has its own fauna and baka when individualized life on the planes is under consideration. Just as the rudimentary first type of fauna and baka includes all the individualized faunas and bakas of dogs, horses, camels, elephants, of all creatures and human beings that live the phenomenal false life of illusion in the gross world. So also the second type of fauna and baka of the planes on the path includes all the individualized fauna bakas of each and all on every plane from the first through the sixth planes of the illusory, subtle, and mental worlds. When a man in a particular plane with his consciousness gradually involving becomes completely dazed by the enchanting experiences of the plane, the man is said to be a mazub of this particular plane. Each mazub is completely absorbed and overpowered by the impressions of illusion on the plane which consistently impregnate his consciousness. Even in the awake state, this mazub of the plane behaves as if he were completely intoxicated by and drowned in the enchantment of the plane. Such a man is commonly known as a must, meaning thereby that the man is God intoxicated.
Maybe do the asterisks now. Yeah.
The mazub and salik of the planes should not be confused with the real mazub of the seventh plane, known as the mazub a kamil, perfect mazub, nor the real salik of the seventh plane. On the other hand, if a man in a particular plane does not get absorbed in and overpowered by the fascinating experiences of the plane, but continues to maintain his poise throughout, while his involving consciousness is persistently impressed by the impressions of illusion of that plane, he is then said to be a salik of the particular plane. Such a salik, to all external appearances, behaves like a very normal man of the world, even though his consciousness is progressively involving and is completely dissociated from the gross world as far as his consciousness, fully focused on the particular plane, is concerned. The salukiyat and musti of each plane are different. There are, however, certain cases when a man in a particular plane is sometimes completely drowned in and absorbed by the fascination of the experiences of the plane and behaves like a mazub. And at other times, he regains his poise and behaves like an ordinary, normal salik of the plane. Such a man on the plane is said to be a mazub salik of the plane. If the predominant behavior is that of a mazub, and a salik mazub of the plane, if the predominant behavior is that of a salik. Such a state and illusion may be compared with the Teruya Avasta at the divine junction in reality.
Thank you, Ernie. Mahu, are you ready to read?
Yes. The third type of final bhaga is of the seventh plane of the final involution of consciousness and is the real final law of the reality and the real bhaga law of the divinity. When the impressioned consciousness of individualized life is totally and finally relieved of all impressions of the illusion, and when this unburdened or impressionless individualized self consciously passes away in the original divine absolute vacuum to gain the fana phila or the I am God state, the goal is finally attained. This is the state of real majzubiyat. The only but infinite difference between the fanas of all the different individualized species and state of illusory life and the final and real fana of the divine life is that in the former, the consciousness is nil, while in the latter, full consciousness prevails. After the state of fana phila, the state of baqa billah is established by some individualized selves to live the life of God as man-God on the earth. Such a man-God lives at one and the same time in all states of life and in all planes. The life of man in illusion, knowing illusion as illusion, and of God in reality. This is the state of real sulukiyat. After attaining the state of fana phila and before establishing the state of baqa billah, there is also a state of turiya avesta at the divine junction between fana phila and baqa billah. In this state, there is sometimes the experience of real majzubiyat of the fana phila, and sometimes the experience of real sulukiyat of the baqa billah. This is the state of the real majzub salik or salik majzub, as the case may be. The consciousness of the false limited I, which was there before fana, matured through the process of involution, and the limited false I was replaced by the real unlimited I in fana phila. In baqa billah, this matured consciousness is now focused once again and is fixed on the I as the real unlimited I, on the mind as universal mind, on energy as unbounded energy, and on the body as universal body, called the Mahakarana Sharir, Sharir. An important fact must be noted here that in the state of baqa billah, simultaneously, the same consciousness is also focused and fixed on the limited I, mind, energy, and body. Wherefore, the salik consciously experiences the false as falsity with the false, and the real as reality with the real. Consequently, in God's state of baqa billah, the same consciousness simultaneously experiences the dual experiences of I am God and I am human. Along with this dual experience, The same consciousness spontaneously also experiences without break the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of God, along with experiences of the weaknesses and sufferings of humanity. It follows that in God's state of Baka Billah, God, in the form of an ordinary human being, establishes himself in his divine life, or man abides in the life of God. In short, Baka Billah is that state of God where abiding in or getting established in God is experienced by those who are defined as saliks or jivan muktas. The salik continuously and consciously experiences simultaneously the dual experience of the I am God state and I am human state, and accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, simultaneously experiencing human weaknesses and sufferings, knowing their falsity to be based on the manifestation of the finite nothing that manifests out of his own state of being everything and infinite.
Thanks, Mahu. In Baka Billah, the life of God in human being established. Again, in Baka Billah, the life of God in human being established, man as God experiences the Sahaj Samadhi. This means that man as God simultaneously, without the least effort, has continually and automatically the dual experience of God and of man. This is the state of perfection. Perfection generally carries with it the sense of the highest pitch of, or the extreme type of, accomplishment. And perfection as such cannot become more perfect. But when the term perfection is used in terms of divinity, there are three types of perfection in the state of Salukiyat of Baka Billah. The first type is known as Kamil, the perfect one. The second type is known as Akmal, the most perfect one. The third type is known as Mukamil, the supremely perfect one. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever in their continual and conscious experience of the eternal reality. But the degrees of comparison that are attached to the perfection are due to the difference in the function of the offices of perfection. Hence, due to differences in function, different attributes are attached to each type of perfection. The camille can spontaneously give conscious experience of the realization of God to only one man, and make only that man like unto him in the eternal experience of the reality. The Akmal can make many like unto him in experience, whereas the Mukamil can make not only any number, even all in the creation, like unto him in the experience of the eternal reality. But he can also spontaneously bestow on any number the transfiguration of their physical bodies, and even make their physique appear and live and experience like unto his own physical body in the gross world, together with giving the eternal conscious experience of the reality. Just read the asterisks here. A Mukamil can make all creation God realized if he wishes. All creation means all human beings and everything that is in creation, from a particle of dust to an elephant. But a Mukamil will never wish to do so, because the carrying out of such a wish would mean the end of cosmic illusion, the whole creation. To put an end to cosmic illusion would amount to putting an end to the divine play. And to end the divine play would go against the very nature or characteristics of God in his original state too, described on page 161. When he remains infinitely conscious and simultaneously infinitely unconscious. Back to the text from the asterisks. Bakabila is the end of the second divine journey. In between the states of Phanaphila and Bakabila, at the divine junction, or Mukam Ifurutat, there is the state of Turiya Avastha, also known as Fana Ma'albaka. Turiya Avastha is that state where sometimes the superconsciousness gives the experience of the I am God state, and where sometimes superconsciousness gives the experience of the I am human state of normal consciousness. This state is experienced by those who are termed Majzub Salik or Paramhansa, and who in this state of Turiya Avastha sometimes experience consciously as I am my own God, and sometimes experience consciously as I am my own creature. Marian, could you read some more?
At the divine junction between the end of the first and the beginning of the second divine journey, the fluctuating divine experiences of divine and human are experienced alternately until the I am God state of Phanafila gradually becomes established in the state of Bhakabila, where the abiding in God state is established and where man is God simultaneously without the least effort automatically undergoes the dual experience of God and man at one and the same time. As soon as the divine junction is crossed, the Majzubiat of Phanafila becomes established as Salukiyat in Bhakabila. The Majzub of Majzubiat could only consciously experience infinite knowledge and power while being drowned in infinite bliss. The Salik of Sulukiyat, however, not only consciously experiences, but also consciously accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss. Although he does not use these infinite aspects for others as kutubs of the Kutubiyat do. Let me repeat that sentence. Let me just say that. The Salik of Salukiyat, however, not only consciously experiences, but also consciously accumulates infinite knowledge, power, and bliss. Although he does not use these infinite aspects for others as kutubs of the Kutubiyat do. Shall I read the asterisk?
Yes, please.
Meher Baba was asked if Majzubs are utterly unconscious of all the spheres, gross, subtle, and mental, of everything except the I am God state, then how is it they react to the physical side of life? Eating, drinking, showing preference to certain things, antipathy to others. Question. Meher Baba replied, the Majzub may apparently like or dislike, ask or reject, seem happy or angry. It is an automatic reflex action of which he is unconscious, like the sound of snoring is to the fast asleep man emitting it. Like the sleepwalker who is unconscious of his actions, however normal or varied they may be, the Majzub is oblivious to his body and surroundings and is conscious only of his divine state of I am God. The end of the second divine journey leads to the third divine journey, which is the state of Kutubiyat, where living the life of God is actually experienced by those who are termed kutubs or sadgurus or perfect masters. The state of Kutubiyat, which follows the Salukiyat of Bhakabila, is where man as God, established in the life of God in Bhakabila, now begins to live the life of God in the state of Kutubiyat as a kutub or a sadguru. He now not only consciously experiences as in the state of Phanafila and consciously accumulates as in the state of Bhakabila, infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, but uses these infinite aspects in this state of Ketubiyat, for those who are still in illusion. Such a man god of the state of Ketubiyat is called a perfect master, who as man has not only become God and established himself in God, but lives the life of God as God's individual representative in illusion. The dual role of I am God and I am human, which was established in Bakabila, is now not only simultaneously experienced, but it is also lived through in the state of Ketubiyat. And the man God, Kutub, Sadguru, or perfect master, now simultaneously lives the life of God and the life of man with all of the strength of the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss of the God state, together with all of the weaknesses and sufferings of the man state.
Thanks, Marian. Ernie.
At the end of the third divine journey, the perfect master not only lives a dual role and displays strength and weakness simultaneously, but also simultaneously utilizes this display of infinite strength through infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, and infinite weakness through infinite suffering for those who are in ignorance and who still conceive the false finite illusion to be infinite and real. In contrast to this state, in the state of Bakabila, God experiences his godhood constantly, simultaneously with the continual and constant experience of his manhood, and yet he cannot use the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss, and also cannot utilize the infinite weakness and suffering for those in ignorance, because God does not live the life of God in this state, as in the state of the Ketubiyat. It is very, very rare, and it is for only very, very few to begin and end their third divine journey in the Ketub or Sadguru state. In this state, man as God now lives the life of God. He now uses the infinite knowledge, power, and bliss that he experiences. He is that God and man, or man God, who has brought down the one indivisible existence into the many. He is that man God who brought down independent reality into illusion and controls illusion from the divine office of his beyond state, Vidnyan Bhumukhi, or Mokam-e Muhammadai. The very life of this man God, or perfect master, is the Sahak Samadhi. Such a perfect master is at one and the same time, simultaneously in all the universes and in all the worlds, on all the levels and on all the planes, living the life of the one and the all. His life is that of living also on particular levels and on particular planes, as every creature, and as an individual of that certain level and of that particular plane. At the same time, together with living the life of God, he lives the life of man on this earth. Asterisk. In the words of Mayor Baba, perfection does not belong to God as God, nor does it belong to man as man. The finite being who is conscious of being finite is obviously short of perfection. But when he is conscious of his being one with the infinite, he is perfect. Thus we have perfection when the finite transcends its limits and realizes its infinity, or when the infinite gives up its supposed aloofness and becomes man. In both cases, the finite and the infinite do not stand outside each other. When there is a happy and conscious blending of the finite and the infinite, we have perfection. In this state of ketubiyat, it may be said that God overlaps Godhood, which means that the consciousness of God, after pervading everything, still remains infinite, unlimited, and unbounded in this beyond state of God, while remaining eternally conscious of the beyond state of God.
Thank you, Ernie. Mahu.
The fourth divine journey pertains to the dropping of the Qutb's body, which is Sharir. Even after dropping his body, the Qutb eternally remains consciously and individually as God, the infinite, and the individual and indivisible state of I am God, of the state of Fana Fillah, which is the goal, is everlastingly experienced. That is, even after the body or the human form is dropped in the fourth divine journey, the experience of conscious, infinite, indivisible individuality is retained eternally as I am God, everything, infinite, and unbounded, one without a second. Similarly, God in the state of Baqa Billah, where the apparently dual role of consciousness of I am God and I am human is manifested, is naturally enacted until the cloak of illusion knowingly and consciously donned is dropped. That is when the human form or the body is dropped, the experience of conscious, infinite, indivisible individuality is retained eternally as I am God, everything, infinite and unbounded, one without a second. God is existence eternal, infinite, and all-pervading. Since God is eternally infinite existence, it follows that there are an infinite number of states of God, infinitely and eternally existing. But fundamentally, there are only two states of God, the original state and the final state. The original state is the beyond state of God, where eternally God is and unconscious is not. The final state is the beyond state of God, where consciousness is eternally of the God is a state of the beyond state of God. I read this again. The original state is the beyond state of God, where eternally God is and consciousness is not. The final state is the beyond state of God, where consciousness is eternally of the God is state of the beyond state of God. The same existence as God prevails eternally, whether it is as the beyond state of God or as the beyond state of God. The only difference is one of consciousness. In the beyond state of God, the existence consciously realizes itself as existing eternally as the beyond state of God is. Therefore, the divine goal is to realize the I am God state, where existence consciously realizes itself as existing eternally as the beyond state of God is. This is the reality, and the conscious realization of this reality, once gained, is retained eternally. Invariably, it manifests itself in no other forms but in human forms of the earth, in different divine states of God, through different divine statuses of majzubiyat, of Turiya Avesta, or Fana Ma'al Baqa, of Sulukiyat, and of Utubiyat. All other intermediary states of God are illusory states where the same eternal, infinite, all-pervading, one, indivisible, formless existence as God, though not realized as the eternal reality, asserts through its very being in assuming forms of infinitely innumerable inanimate and animated things and creatures as lifeless and living states of God, while in the process of gaining full consciousness of the eternal reality of infinite existence. All these intermediary illusory states of God thrive in the illusion of cosmic creation through multifarious and diverse gross, subtle, and mental impressions of illusion. And though the entire cosmic creation is illusion, yet it serves the purpose of a divine incubator, where consciousness of the divine incubates, and where such incubation produces the maturity to realize the eternal reality after the consciousness is nurtured and progressively developed through multifarious, diverse, and finite impressions and experiences of the opposites of the gross, subtle, and mental forms and worlds of the cosmic creation.
Thanks, Mahu. Next week, we'll pick up here at page top of page 144.
Okay.
Sure, all I can say is good luck.